Hello, everyone. This is Upfront, where we have quick conversations about how to build a stronger organization by connecting with your frontline team who are critical to your success, but are often hard to reach and engage. Our guests are thought leaders who share real-life experiences and insights that you can actually put to work. No fluff, just real stuff at Upfront. I'm your host, Sonia Sapaban at Trivi, an easy AI-driven messaging and feedback tool with no apps or logins required. Your frontline will love Trivi, and your leaders will thrive with real-time insights and next steps. You can find information on how to connect with us in the show notes. Now, let's get on with our show. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Brent Wiggins, AOG Director of Operations at Stevens Aerospace and Defense Systems in Greenville, South Carolina. Welcome to Upfront, Brent. So great to have you here.
Thank you, Sonia. It's great to be here as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a good day. So tell us a bit about yourself and Stevens Aerospace and Defense and what you do there.
So Stevens Aerospace and Defense, we kind of do a couple of different things. So we do some government contracting and defense, obviously, and then we also do corporate aviation as well. So basically business jets, turboprops, things of that nature. And so we're an aircraft maintenance facility. We have 3 facilities as well as multiple locations in AOG, which is kind of what I do. And basically in AOG, we're kind of, I would say, somewhat the Navy SEALs of aircraft maintenance, where we're going in and out of locations that we typically wouldn't go to or have facilities and have to find the resources and get what we need to get the aircraft fixed and safe flying again.
And what does it stand for, AOG? You know, we always want our audience to, when we use acronyms, to explain what it is.
Yeah, it's aircraft on ground. So basically it can't be flown unless it's fixed at that point. So that's where we have to come in and, like I said, find all the resources and get it going back safely again. Yeah,
I know that's, I can imagine, right? Both with government contracts, but also corporate jets, when are trying to get somewhere. And so your people are really, I like how you put it, the Navy SEAL of aviation. So you said your team operates across 13 locations, and it's really in demanding conditions sometimes, right? Because you don't pick the time when the aircraft decided to go down. And yet you've built a culture from our conversation before when you were sharing that technicians really feel supported and empowered to ask questions, raise concerns. What are the leadership practices that you think have been most effective in creating that kind of an environment?
That's a great question, Sonia. I think one of the biggest keys for me has just been learning that my role is a support role. It's not a dictatorship. It's not telling people exactly what to do. It's more of a, how can I support them personally, professionally? I think another big factor has been learning to listen. Quite the type A personality. So when I go into a meeting, I used to feel like everybody needed to hear my opinion because I'm giving direction, right? But that's definitely not the case. It's more of I need to listen more and support them than I do actually dictating what needs to be accomplished. And then obviously without that support level, then it's easy for those guys to lose morale, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, and you operate across all these locations. So what forms, does this listening take? How do you listen? Is it mostly in person? Is it other ways of listening?
We do have meetings and things, right? And when I say meetings, it's kind of Teams meetings, or we'll have phone call meetings or briefings in the evenings and the mornings, things of that nature. And it's really listening in to figure out like what the team needs and how we can support them moving forward, because you'll always hear their hurdles when you're in those meetings and how their issues are kind of changing their trajectory for the day. And I think it's important for us as leadership to listen in and understand how we can support those needs so that they don't have low morale or burnout, in essence.
Yeah, you've mentioned that, burnout often reveals itself like through changes in behavior or performance, right? And you kind of watch for that and listen for that, right? And you're very good at it from the conversation we had earlier. So what are some of the early clues that you've learned to maybe watch for that may not be as obvious, right, to everybody? And, before it really becomes a big performance issue, right? Because once it's a performance issue, it's kind of a little too late, right?
That's true.
So what can other leaders learn from your experience in terms of those early clues that you watch for or listen for?
So believe it or not, Sonia, what I have found is that the high performers are the easiest ones to kind of see what's going on. Is there kind of subtle indications or signs that maybe something is going on in maybe their life, or maybe it's just work in general. So one of the things that I'm looking for is there a subtle performance degradation, and it's not something that's major. It's not like you're going to see out of a high performer this major degradation of performance. It's going to be something just very subtle, something such as they're looking for resources and they would absolutely be able to get those resources previously. But now for some reason, it seems a little bit more difficult for them to accomplish. And so that's just one subtle example of watch the high performer and see like how they interact normally, and then pull in that data whenever you're looking into their conversations or maybe their communications and say, okay, something's going awry, or we need to take a look at this, ask some questions, and kind of dive a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that once the burnout really like is full blown, right, or when it really takes hold, it's kind of hard to walk that back, right? I mean, it's a lot easier to intervene when it's kind of there's early signs, right? Then if you just say, oh, it was just a bad day, you just dismiss it, then it's better to just, is that what you're saying, just to like really look into it? Because once it gets into full blown burnout, then it's hard to bring people back from that.
I think addressing it immediately and asking questions helps to not even go further down the burnout track, right? I mean, when you don't ask the questions, they feel like they're not being heard or they're not being seen in those moments. And I think it's harder for you as a leader to kind of roll that back a little bit further once it goes a little deeper. And it just becomes extremely difficult whenever they've gotten to the point of burnout to even get them out of it. I mean, time off doesn't help. There's a multitude of things that you can try that they don't help once it's at that level. And sometimes it requires a job change, which is super unfortunate for everybody in the industries. So I think it's important to definitely be able to spot those, especially for the high performers. Like I said, it's extremely easy. I didn't talk about other colleagues, but another factor that we look at is, are they drawing back from the team? Like if we're in a team meeting, do you see people draw back from the team to where they don't want to be in those atmospheres? They're not talking to other people. Like, are they trying to draw themselves away from the team as a whole? And if they are, that's just another sign that, hey, we're going somewhere we don't need to be, whether that's burnout or, maybe they just don't feel a part of the team. There's a couple of different scenarios, but most of the time, especially in our line of work, it's a high pressure cooker environment for sure. So it kind of gets to a point when we're not operating as a team and not communicating as a team. It really affects the outcome of what we're trying to accomplish. So it's kind of easy to spot for sure.
Yeah, these are pretty high skill employees, right? I mean, they're not easy to find. I mean, once something like that happens, like you said, it's unfortunate for the person, but it's also a challenge for the business, right, to replace them.
Yeah, they're not, I don't mean this in any derogatory way, but they're not their typical technicians, right? They have leadership skills already to be able to manage their own projects, their own events, to communicate with the customer directly, all those things. So, in typical formats, a technician doesn't necessarily communicate directly with the customer. Absolutely instances because they're trying to get to the root of the problem, and so they kind of have to be high performers, type A personalities to be able to handle the customer communication.
Yeah, and given that, right, doesn't it make it harder for them to admit that maybe they're getting to burnout? I mean, do you have that issue when sometimes maybe you confront them or you try and help them and they're like, oh no, I'm good, I'm fine, that sort of thing?
Yeah. That it's crazy you asked that, because absolutely that is the hardest part, because most of the time they don't want to tell you, hey, I'm to this point. But there's times where they want to work more. And like we said in previous conversation, I think this is probably one of the fewer jobs I've had where you actually have to throttle the workforce back instead of push it forward. And it's because they are very driven individuals and they are type A personalities, that you kind of have to drive them back a little bit, because it will get to that point of burnout pretty easily, just in the workload and what we try to accomplish daily.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You have a tough job, man. I can tell you that. One of the things that comes to my mind is, you have 13 locations, you're very good at this, you go around, but for organizations, our audience there, there are some organizations that may be larger, even your own, as it grows, it becomes more geographically dispersed. You can't always have it's the best way is to have leaders like yourself, but you can't always rely on having those kind of leaders everywhere or all the time. So how can leaders that are maybe listening or watching this episode create more continuous and low friction ways, maybe to stay connected to their front line and identify some potential issues early before they show up in behavior changes, in retention degradation, in performance issues? What comes to your mind? Because I know
Yeah. First of all, I'm not the greatest at this for sure. So I definitely want to make sure everybody knows I am not the best at this either. But trying to create atmospheres for technicians to have the idea to communicate well and get to those communication levels, as well as opening up opportunities for that to happen. I would say, like, it starts at the bottom, creating leadership from bottom up as well. And when I say that, like, having what we see typically, even in our industry and probably all other industries as well, is that if you have a technical ability, you become, and you're really good at your job, you become in a leadership role without having necessarily the leadership training that comes along with it. And I think starting now and training even the guys at the lowest level on the front line how to be true leaders helps to get to these talking points easier. It helps to get to the point of being able to communicate the problems, the burnout, all the feelings that they have along the way, to get them to kind of talk as well. But at the same time, I would say, and we talked about this previously, but not even having like phone calls, because that's the hardest part. Have a FaceTime call, have a Teams call, have something that you can actually see some face-to-face, some interaction, because it's hard to be at all places at one time, especially in our world. And anybody that has a lot of locations or a lot of personnel underneath them, it's hard to be at every location. But I think the investment into each person is probably the most beneficial thing. And that's how it's easy to spot the burnout, is knowing how they typically would interact, how they typically communicate, and knowing that that's not normal for them. And that all comes with relationship building and knowing who those people are and what they do and what they stand for.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to do, but I agree with you. I mean, seeing people is always, if you can't do it in person, at least some, electronic way, of, or just checking in with them, just even quick text message, how are you doing today? Something like that, I think goes a long way. We have seen that, we work mostly with industries like yours, out there with people, at job sites in the field. And they just don't get as much interaction with leadership. And then leadership is always surprised when something, bad happens. So I think you have very good recommendation there. We always like to leave our audience with, what I call a golden nugget. So if you could change one thing, in your own operations, or maybe recommend one thing to others that you may have tried, to help the frontline workers do better and feel better about themselves and their work, and therefore, obviously do better work for the business, what would that one thing be? If you were king for one day, Brent, just king for one day, what would you wish for?
I would wish for more time to be able to invest into people. I think that's the golden nugget is stop worrying about the outcomes and start worrying about the people that produce the outcomes more. That's something that was hard for me to understand early on is we're all outcome driven individuals. And so I think the golden nugget is invest into the people that are producing the outcomes. Don't invest into the outcome itself.
Yeah, and I'll say, I was on the front line for some time as a manufacturing engineer myself, and I think one observation I had was, most of our processes, tools, just how we do business, are driven from the top and therefore built for people that are in those environments. People that are at desks, with computers all day long. They can take breaks when they want, sort of, and not built for people. So when we talk about investing in your people, the frontline people, it's just starting to even think about when you're making investments in processes, tools, whatever projects. It's important to keep, the work environment, the reality that frontline folks are dealing with, and say, how easy is it for them to get to this, right? I mean, we talked, I think, you do engagement surveys, I think.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we talked about, right, participation and this sort of thing. And, well, it's hard most of these surveys and things are built for somebody going to a computer and doing their thing. They're not built for the front line, right? So it's not surprising if a lot of environments just don't have very good engagement on the engagement survey itself, and it's always about, well, it starts with investing in your people. Like I love how you put it, invest in them, right? And think about it, investments you're making when you're making investment decisions, is it with not even necessarily additional investments, but as you're making investments, are you keeping them in mind, right? I mean, do you think how does that resonate with you?
I totally agree, because I think from a leadership perspective, when there's not a lot of engagement in those employee engagement surveys, it speaks volumes of, hey, as a leader, I have a lot more to accomplish, because they don't feel like they have the environment to be able to speak up in those moments to say, hey, this is what's going on. And I think that's just a good indicator of how much work I have left to do when it comes to those moments. So I think even reaching inside to myself or any kind of leader saying, hey, self-reflection, it's not on them because they didn't do it. It's probably on you to figure out, like, hey, why have you not created that environment for them to feel comfortable enough to speak up or to say something in those surveys.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Hey, listen, I've really enjoyed this, Brent. Thanks again for joining me on the Upfront podcast. For our audience, if this episode has been helpful, please find us on Spotify to listen to more episodes, or on YouTube to watch more episodes, and share it with others. If you need help connecting with your frontline or deskless employees, see the show notes for information on how to connect with us at Trivy, or just email us at upfront@gotrivy.com. That's upfront@gotrivy.com. Bye for now, till the next episode.